Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our City Council meeting for Wednesday, July the 9th. Before we begin this evening, I would like to announce that the successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency meeting will be held immediately following the adjournment of tonight's City Council meeting. I've done that bit. If you wish to speak this evening, please submit a written comment for each item and submit it to our recording secretary prior to the public comment portion of the item. And Michelle is sitting right there. I will now call this meeting to order. We will begin with the land acknowledgement. The city of Agoura Hills acknowledges that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Chumash Nation. Descendants of Chumash still remain, and we honor and pay our respects to their elders and various groups that make up the past, present, and emerging as they continue their stewardship of our lands and waters. We have a responsibility and commitment to elevate the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of the city of Agoura Hills, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. I will now call on Michelle to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand.
Thank you, Michelle. I will defer to the recording secretary for the roll call.
Good evening. Councilmember Anderson.
Present.
Councilmember Anstead. Councilmember Klein-Lopez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolf.
Present.
Mayor Sylvester.
Here.
Mayor Sylvester, you have a quorum with Councilmember Anstead absent.
There was no closed session today. We'll now move on to the approval of the agenda. Will the maker of the motion and the second to approve the agenda state your names?
I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Deborah Klein-Lopez.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolf, I'll second.
I'll defer to the recording secretary for the roll call vote.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Klein-Lopez.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolf.
Aye.
Mayor Sylvester.
Aye.
Mayor Sylvester, you have approval 4-0.
Thank you. We have no presentations this evening, so we'll now move on to the Intergovernmental Special Purpose Committee and departmental reports. We will begin with our guests from the Las Vegas Municipal Water District, Water and Wastewater Rate Structure Update.
Thank you, Mayor Sylvester. Good evening, City Council. My name is Ricky Clark, Public Affairs Associate with Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, and I'm joined by my colleague, Brian Ritchie, Director of Finance and Information Technology, as well as LVMWD Board Director, Gary Burns. Now, we have about 5 minutes to share some updates on the district's recent efforts to improve water reliability, as well as our most recent rate study. So I'll get right into it. If you can back it up a little bit. Okay, forward. Thank you. All right, as most of us know, LVMWD is 100% reliant on imported water, and that is a source that faces several threats, including impacts from climate change, rising operational costs, and of course, evolving regulations, both on the water quality and environmental fronts. These challenges have pushed the district to find new solutions, and these solutions largely involve water supply diversification. Next slide. The Pure Water Project Las Virgenes Triunfo is probably the most popular of these and the most well-known. It's also our largest foray into water supply diversification. That'll supply about 30% of our drinking water locally by 2030. Now, most recently, we partnered with startup tech company Ocean Well to run a pilot of their new ocean desalination technology in our reservoir. And although a little bit further out than the Pure Water Project, their proprietary Blue Water Farm technology could allow us to source up to 15% of our water supply, not just locally, but from the ocean. Other sources the district has been exploring include interconnections with other agencies, like the recently completed Calleguas LV intertie, as well as partnerships with other agencies for groundwater banking. Now, I say all that to say that during the last drought, the LV board made a promise to pursue any and all pathways to greater resiliency and reliability, And this is just a snapshot of those efforts and us making good on that promise. Now, these efforts, like everything else, do come at a cost. Next slide. And in addition to the rising costs I mentioned earlier, proactive investments like the advanced water purification facility that will be built right here in Agoura, these investments cost money. And so rate increases are just a part of the pie when it comes to covering these costs and making sure we're well funded. So the district has embarked on a 5-year rate study to ensure that we do remain properly funded and can continue to provide critical water service now and into the future. So go ahead and hit the next slide. Now, before I get into the results of the study, I just wanted to offer a quick refresher on LVMWD's water budget-based billing system for those that were not familiar. Each customer is given a unique water budget based on household factors such as the number of residents that they have in their home, as well as the size of irrigable outdoor area. These and several other factors comprise a customer's overall water budget, and it ensures they get enough water allocated to them based on their household needs. So as you can see, customers will fall in one of 3 tiers based on their ability to stay within their budget, and that includes efficient, inefficient, and excessive. Our philosophy is such that we don't want to dictate what people should do with their water. We just want to make sure that they have the guidelines to ensure efficiency. So just as long as you stay within your budget, you're good to go. And of course, customers who choose to exceed their budgets typically pay more for their water. Next slide. And just to give you an idea of where the district compares to other water agencies when it comes to the cost of our rates, our bar is that first one furthest to the left. And you'll see that we're nowhere near the most expensive, but we also like to make sure that we're charging enough to cover the cost of doing business while making much needed investments in our future. We like to take a methodical approach to rate increases to avoid sticker shock after several years of not making those increases. So, now that we kind of have that background, let's take a look at the actual customer impact of the proposed rate changes. Next slide. So much like those water budgets that I mentioned, rate impacts will vary customer to customer based on what tier they fall under, the size of their meter, as well as several other factors. So what we did for the purpose of this presentation is to pull data to reflect the average LV customer. And so what you're looking at here is how the bill is going to change over the next 5 years for our average customer. I can, give you a second to take a look at those numbers, but essentially what reads is that the average residential customer bill is going to increase an average of about $11 through 2035. So like I mentioned, and you can go to the next slide, rate impacts are going to vary greatly beyond the average, but the main takeaway here is that customers who stay efficient and remain within their budgets, as always, will be the least impacted. And of course, inefficient and excessive customers are going to be feeling those increases a lot more. So again, we really try to encourage customers to remain efficient and be mindful about their water use, and also take advantage of the many resources that the district provides to help them do that. One main one is the bill calculator, and you'll see a screenshot of that right to the right. And that's active and live on our website right now. Customers can go fill in their individual information, and they'll be able to see how these proposed rate increases will affect their bill for the next couple of years. So I just want to highlight before we move forward that these are just proposed rates right now. We are currently in the rate study process, and so next steps include 2 public hearings that we'll be hosting in August. We'll have one in person on the 19th and another one virtually on the 26th. Both of those will be at 6 o'clock in the evening, and we encourage customers to come, get all of their detailed information, and have any questions or concerns addressed. Next slide. And just to wrap it up and bring it all home, securing our future through water reliability requires the meaningful investments that I've touched on here, keeping conservation at the forefront, and keeping our rates aligned with and in support of these efforts. I like to highlight that water is not a common or basic commodity. It's a critical service, and we have to do whatever is required to secure our future. So with that, and you can go to the last slide, I conclude our presentation with a QR code if any of you all wanted to take a look at the bill calculator right now, and you can always visit that link to learn more about the current rate study and where we're at in the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from council? Yes.
Can you just mind putting back the bill increase slide? So is the $11 per year the 30 to 35? Because 232 to 295 is more than 11 per year.
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated because in the first year, the rate change impact is going to be slightly different than through the rest of the 10-year period. And Brian Ritchie can speak to this if I'm not explaining it properly, but the average is just for the course of the 10 years, but each year to year is going to look a little different.
Okay, and for those who struggle or have income pressures,
Sure.
do you have rates like the electric company has the CARE and FARA rates for medical, for seniors? Do you have any kind of rates that help those that are struggling with the affordability of this?
Yeah, so what we have are rate adjustments, and I think if you go back a couple slides, we might be able to. So we have rate adjustments for medical care, for animals in the home, basically anything that's going to better dial in on what that household individual needs are, and we'll allow variances to make sure that they get enough water, or if needed, kind of a discount on their rate or their bill, essentially.
Okay, so is that something they apply for, or I guess what do we do if there's someone who says to us we're struggling with the affordability of the increases?
Absolutely.
Better way to phrase it.
They can reach out to our customer service team. We usually include the number at the end, but just our main customer service line, and we're always there to help. We usually send out customer service reps if they need help with their outdoor space, anything that can be handled online, whether it's changing the number of people in their home or getting a variance for one of the topics that you mentioned. Our customer service team is always there to help.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I thank you for that. I'm curious about future supply and potential costs. So one of your very first slides, you said we're 100% reliant on the State Water Project, and I forget what language you used, but I feel like I heard, and we don't know what the costs of that may look like going forward.
Sure.
And so we're investing in this, and I love this language, supply diversification.
Sure.
So I'm curious if you have some sense of whether this supply diversification will, this isn't the right way to say it, but shield us from potential increases in costs from just being reliant on the State Water Project.
100%, yes. Anytime you can localize your water source, you're going to be shielding against those increased imported water costs. We know that they're going to continue to go up because we've already gotten those rate increases passed down from Metropolitan for the next few years. We know that energy is going up, and we know that scarcity is driving those costs. So being able to localize our water supply at the very least lets us cut out those power costs that are required to pump that water from Northern California. Local water is always the most cost efficient. Of course, when you're paying for a brand new purification facility and all the pipeline, there's some upfront costs at first, but it pays for itself in just a matter of years.
Thank you, because that's what was going on in my mind when I was looking at those rate increases and also then looking at the bar chart, that we're higher, for instance, than Santa Clarita in part because we are making these investments in supply diversification. And so it is basically an investment that supports us in the future.
Absolutely, and it also has to do with our source water. So if you have that reliance on one source water and it's coming from over 400 miles away, you're paying for a lot of power, you're paying for everything that it takes to get it down here. Whereas you have a lot of other water agencies that have the luxury of local water and they don't have to pay those additional costs because they can just pump it right from under them. So we're trying to create that local resiliency ourselves.
Thank you.
More comments than questions. I want to thank my colleagues for coming here. Ricky, you do a great presentation. Thank you for that. And I want to congratulate Brian Ritchie on his recent promotion to Director of Finance and Technology, and thank Director Burns for coming out here tonight and really highlighting that. Ricky, you mentioned it, but every drop comes from 400 and about 40 miles away. And the education needed, the district does a really good job of educating people, but the water doesn't come from your tap, and with inflation, you're seeing prices of everything go up and water bills haven't changed. And we have to invest in this new source because we will be in a situation in which we were in 2022, where there was almost no outdoor watering, and it was just going to be for indoor water. What was the term? Health and human safety purposes.
Yep.
And the Pure Water plant is going to have, we're going to be 30% less reliant on imported water, but for the city of Agoura Hills, it's going to serve a few purposes because it's going to help possibly with some of our MS4 compliance with stormwater diversion. And while that water, it's going to be a hyper-local water source, and while that water is going to go into the system and benefit the whole service area, it's going to have, I think, outsized benefits for the city of Agoura Hills. So with everything going up, it makes sense that the cost of water is going to be going up. And again, it's important that we educate people so that sticker shock doesn't come.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd just like to follow up with a couple of questions. You said you're going to have 2 public meetings on August the 19th and the 26th. How are you publicizing that to our community?
We'll have ads in the Acorn. Well, first, let me say that those dates are tentative. We'll have ads in the Acorn. We'll be reaching out on social media. We'll be partnering with our cities to make sure you guys can get it out via your channels as well. And then everything in compliance with Prop 218 guidelines as well. Good.
And I was on the recent water tour, so thank you for that. It was very interesting. And we were told there that they're going to be creating an additional water source for us by reversing the flow through the Sepulveda Pass and bringing water from the LA Basin up into the Sepulveda Reservoir, correct, which could then come out to us. So are we bearing some of the cost for that as well? So is that part of this rate increase, or is that being borne by Metropolitan?
That's a good question. Brian, do you have any? I don't think so. The Sepulveda project is a metropolitan initiative. If anything, it may be a part of the pass-through rates that are passed down to our agency as a customer of Metropolitan.
So they would do it that way.
But yeah, I would say that was built into Metropolitan's recent rate increases
Right.
that we are incurring.
So our rate increases are for our own new local water sources.
Correct.
And also another thing I think we should be stressing too is the quality of our water. Because I know a lot of people spend a lot of money every week at the supermarket, and it's more than $11, buying water. We should not be buying water.
Absolutely.
I mean, so we need to get that message out that our tap water, I drink it, it is perfectly fine for everybody to drink. And,
Yeah.
If we're paying more for our water rates, we can save on not buying bottled water.
Absolutely.
Which also has the other issue of being plastic bottles too. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any other?
I have a comment. At yesterday's Metropolitan Board meeting, the board authorized $54 million for this specific project. So the money is coming from Metropolitan.
Great. Thank you very much. Anything more? So thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
this evening. We'll now move on to my favorite, our Agoura Hills Library update.
Okay, now I won't be nervous. I'll be just fine. So, is this good here? Okay. Good evening, Mayor Sylvester, City Manager Hamburger, City Council members, and city staff. This is my quarterly report for 2025, and tonight I'll give you a little look at what our people in that library, our clientele, are like. So, in that library, we have students that I've told you before, that all ages, college kids, tutors working with children during the summer. We have adults in that library all day that are working from home, either because they don't want to be at home or there's too many people or whatever reason, but they're there all day. As you know, we have 3 special need groups that come in the library, so and they're some of the best times of my day. The 2 groups are that actually come in to be in the children's area and to use the computers and listen to stuff. It's amazing. Children and parents trying to find a cool place on a hot day. If the park's too hot, disadvantaged individuals or individuals with mental health issues, people with power outages. So we serve everybody, unless they cross the line and I have to deal with them. But the one group I do want to mention in particular is because we are an aging in place community, of which I am one, what we see in the library is more people having trouble with computers. They just can't do it. They're going to have something happen at home and they come in and say, I don't know how to do these forms. I don't know how to finish my licensing for my whatever. And so I can see that happening more as we go forward. So, and we cannot do the forms for them. We certainly help them, but we can't do that for them. So tonight, on a happy note, I'll mention the things we had in the last quarter. We had very successful programs with our Opera Bambino program for babies. That's the LA Opera coming out. That's the third year in a row. They like us. Our trivia program is always solid. Our Sisters in Crime are every month. 2 to 3 authors come and talk about their books. That's starting to draw a few more people of interest. I think people who want to be writers. And then our Music for Babies, which is monthly and paid for by the Friends, of which Councilmember Wolf and his wife have participated. So also because it's Summer Discovery right now, we are a recipient of a grant from the Edison International Company. So on July 25th, and you do have the flyers, is the engineering and design programs. The first one is toy design workshop, and the second is build your own contraption. So I'm hoping I don't have to help with that because I would not possibly be able to do any of it. So you will be meeting someone who will be doing that tonight. For TeenWise, we have a program quarterly coming up called Adult 101, and that is featuring on certain life skills for teens. Katie will be doing that program, and then she's also going to be having a scary story writing contest in the fall. We, as you know, have our displays up. So for June, we had our displays in adult, young adult, and children's for Juneteenth and Pride. And so we had no issues. It went very, very well. So with that, I guess I have a little extra of something here to do, which is I'd like to introduce you to someone special. As you know, we've been without a children's librarian for almost 5 months. In 2 months, I had to do it. So I am very grateful to now have introduced you to Sarah Hollins, our new children's librarian.
Thank you, Nina. Can you all hear me? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Hi again. I'm Sarah Hollins. I'm the new children's librarian at Agoura Hills. I have my master's degree in library and information science from USC. So go Trojans, and if you're UCLA, I'm sorry. This is my first time as a children's librarian, but I have a background in teaching and in childcare as well as in archives and data management. And I've been getting to know the Agoura Hills community and having a lovely time, as I have. And I've been getting to know the families and building relationships with them. I enjoyed my combo with Amy Jones-Brink over there the other day. And I'm looking forward to starting some new clubs for the children at the library. I'm going to be starting a Pokemon club and a graphic novel club. And I've already gotten some children that are interested in those because we're trying to target that age range of ages 8 to 12 that aren't coming in for as many programs as often. And the Friends of the Library are helping me purchase a guitar because they play guitar. So I'm going to be playing guitar in story times once we have that, which will be a first for the library. So I'm excited to capture their attention because we're getting a lot of little ones, and I'm hoping that will kind of help them make it through story time and keep their attention. And speaking of story time, we just moved the story time from 10 a.m. to 10:30 to better address the needs of the community. And I started in May, and this was our biggest turnout for story time with the new time. So usually we get about 8 to 10 kids, and this time we got 14. So I'm hoping that continues. I know sometimes in the summer with vacations that could be tough. And then we'll also start trying to show some more children's movies too, as we've had those requests this summer. So that's all I have for you, just a brief overview.
Welcome. We're so glad you're here. I have
Thank
a
you.
question for you because
Yeah.
I noticed on Nextdoor
Yes.
that somebody was looking for a babysitting class for their
Oh, okay.
teenager. Does the library ever offer something like that?
We don't have any, but that's something I could look into and see what those options might be. Yeah, of course.
Well, we're glad you're with us.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I will now defer to our City Council member, Deborah Klein-Lopez, for the Clean Power Alliance update.
Actually, because of the holiday, our board meeting got pushed, so I have nothing to report. We're meeting tomorrow.
Okay, moving right along. Do we have any staff reports? Seeing none? Are there any reports from City Council? No, it's been nice and quiet. We're now moving on to public comments. This section is reserved for persons wishing to speak on items not listed on the agenda that are under the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. If you have something to distribute to the City Council, please do not approach the dais. hand your item to the recording secretary, and she will distribute to us on your behalf. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and a speaker's time may not be transferred to another speaker. Persons addressing the City Council shall not engage in disorderly conduct that disrupts or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting. I will now defer to the recording secretary.
Thank you, Mayor Sylvester. No written public comments have been received and no speaker cards have been submitted.
Thank you so much. We will now move on to the consent calendar. This section is reserved for persons wishing to speak on items on the consent calendar. I will now defer to the recording secretary.
Thank you. No written public comments have been received and no speaker cards have been submitted.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the City Council on the consent calendar? Seeing none, I will now call for a motion and a second to adopt the consent calendar.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolf, I'll make a motion to adopt the consent calendar.
Councilmember Anderson seconds.
I will defer to our recording secretary for the roll call vote.
Councilmember Anderson?
Aye.
Councilmember Klein Lopez?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolf?
Aye.
Mayor Sylvester?
Aye.
Mayor Sylvester, you have approval 4-0.
Thank you. Our next item is a discussion regarding Oak Tree Ordinance planning principles. I will now defer to Principal Planner Robbie Nesevic for the staff presentation.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight we are discussing the Oak Tree Ordinance Amendment that staff has begun working on. And specifically, we're going to discuss the proposed planning principles, which will help guide staff when making decisions on language to include in the draft ordinance. The format of tonight's presentation is meant to get as much feedback as possible. As you have probably read in the staff report, our approach to amending the Oak Tree Ordinance was to evaluate the shortcomings or issue areas of our current ordinance and to come up with goals and objectives, which we're calling planning principles, to eliminate those issues and create a well-rounded ordinance. After giving you a brief background on the project, I'm going to walk through each of the 6 issue areas and planning principles and pause after each one to allow you to discuss and ask questions of staff. Following the discussion on the issue areas and planning principles, I will go over the next steps for the project. Amending the Oak Tree Ordinance is a City Council goal, and it was prompted by a few key issues with the ordinance that make its implementation difficult for city staff and onerous for property owners, particularly single-family homeowners. I will talk about these issues in more depth as we go through the presentation. City staff met with the Land Use and Economic Development Subcommittee on June 10th, 2025, to discuss the proposed planning principles, and minor comments were received, which have been addressed in the staff report. I'll discuss one specific question received regarding fire protection later in the presentation. Without further ado, our first issue area is consistency and consolidation. Oak Tree regulations currently live in 5 different locations of the Agoura Hills Municipal Code. There are the Oak Tree Preservation Guidelines in the zoning ordinance, Appendix A of the Agoura Hills Municipal Code, where there lives more specific Oak Tree Preservation Guidelines. We have the Senate Bill 9 standards that contain specific oak tree requirements. We have the objective design standards for multifamily and mixed-use projects, and we have affordable housing overlay district standards. So with requirements living in different locations, as well as the guidelines being long and complex, it inevitably leads to more staff time and consultant time spent on enforcement and reviewing oak tree reports for compliance. Additionally, the Oak Tree Preservation Guidelines sometimes conflict with Appendix A, and the permit requirement thresholds are not straightforward. So one example is that the zoning ordinance requires no less than 4-to-1 mitigation for removed trees, while Appendix A only requires 3-to-1 for commercial projects. So with that, our staff's proposed planning principle number 1 is to ensure internal consistency and consolidate all Oak Tree regulations into one area of the code. We want to reorganize the information in a way that is easy to read and provides clarity for the public and staff. And the way that we are planning to do this is by essentially creating the flow of the ordinance to mimic essentially the application procedure for an oak tree permit. So you would start off with definitions, then move to applicability, move into application requirements, permit thresholds, mitigation, enforcement, et cetera. And so with that, I'll pass it off to the City Council if anybody has any questions about this planning principle.
Anybody wish to
No,
say anything?
Honestly, brilliant of you to do this principle by principle. I love this. As many of you know, I'm trained as a lawyer, and the idea that we have inconsistencies in our code is going to keep me up at night until we get it up. So I think this is fantastic.
And great.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is just questions?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, I'll move on to issue area number 2. The current oak tree regulations aim to protect oak trees through permit and development restrictions and punitive action with little or no incentives to plant new oak trees. This has inevitably led property owners to be less willing to plant new oak trees on their property out of fear of future repercussions or restrictions. Punitive oak tree regulations may deter property owners from removing existing oak trees on an individual basis. However, it may also dissuade property owners from planting new oak trees on their property in the first place. Heritage oak tree is any oak tree that is larger than 48 inches in diameter, but that definition doesn't currently live in the definitions section. Additionally, there are no incentives to maintain a heritage oak, but there are much larger penalties for removal. Some incentives that staff will consider are parking reductions for oak trees placed in commercial parking lots and potentially other development incentives. Once we get to issue area number 4, we will also discuss the potential for a grant or reimbursement program. We could also provide plaques to property owners that maintain heritage trees. So for proposed planning principle number 2, we would like to reimagine ways to encourage the planting of new oak trees and reduce the cost burden of oak trees on property owners. There should be a good balance between incentives and protections with enough flexibility to not discourage new plantings. We want to clearly define heritage oak trees and provide greater protections for those heritage oak trees. We want to also provide incentives for properties that celebrate and maintain them. Once again, I'll pass it off if anybody has questions or comments on this.
Thank you. Any questions?
You know, actually, I do. And thank you. You answered the question around the incentives, so thank you for that. I was curious about what that could look like. So would that also be part of cleaning up the code? Would incentives and these things then go into the new code? Okay, that totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? No. You may continue.
All right. So issue area number 3, our ordinance establishes that oak trees within the city are valuable assets and that the public should be recompensed for any loss or damage to an oak tree. The mitigatory remedies for illegal removals are based on a tree value assigned to the tree using the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers method or the CTLA method. The CTLA method establishes a basic value for the tree based on cross-sectional area and the cost of the largest available replacement tree of the same species. Where it gets a little hairy is that the basic value is then adjusted based on a ratio determined by the desirability and suitability of the tree in the current location, the tree's health and structural integrity, and the tree's contribution to the landscape, property value, and visibility. The final adjusted value can vary depending on who does the evaluation and often leads to disputes between the city's arborists and arborists that are hired by the violator. These disputes are costly in terms of staff time and consultant time, and also usually involves the city's prosecutor's time, for which the city has to pay for. Separately, tree trimming companies are frequent violators of the city's oak tree ordinance. Establishing a registration process where tree trimming companies can become certified by the city would be a good, relatively low-cost option to ensure compliance and dissuade bad actors. The city's oak tree consultant could provide periodic trainings to applicants about city regulations and best practices and revoke certifications for compliance issues. And with that, proposed planning principle number 3 is to provide for clear and objective enforcement remedies and flexible replacement options. We want to explore options to dissuade bad actors and encourage compliance, particularly with tree trimming companies, potentially by establishing and enforcing company registrations for oak tree trimming. And I'll pass it back.
Councilmember Klein-Lopez.
I do have one follow-up question on that from our committee meeting. What does the enforcement of a certified tree trimmer or a registration look like? Because I know a lot of times if my neighbor is getting a tree trimmed, you know, they're knocking on my door going, "You want that one too?" Like, it seems very flexible and fluid, the tree companies that come in and out of the neighborhood. So how does that word get out? What does that look like? How would I know if someone's knocking on my door last minute to do a tree trimming? What do I ask for? And as a resident, how would I even know to ask? What does that look like?
So typically the idea is just to get all of the certified tree trimmers on a list so that if somebody from the city wanted to come and say, "Hey, do you have a list of certified tree trimmers?" Or we could even advertise that we do have a list of certified tree trimmers. That way people can come in and use one of the city certified tree trimmers. It wouldn't necessarily mean that companies would have to be certified with the city. It's just providing incentives for businesses to come in and get certified.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
So related to that, what I'm hearing you say is we won't require tree trimmers to be certified. We will offer it as essentially like Angie's List for those. So then, question for you, curious if we have thought about the idea of a safe harbor for residents, that if they use a certified tree trimmer, then they can rest assured that they won't then have enforcement. Because I can imagine a world where our certified tree trimmers are kind of like labor unions and they're going to be more expensive. And so if I'm a homeowner, maybe I'm going to go with a cheaper person just because I'm going to go with the cheaper, but then so it could help to make sure that the folks who are trimming the trees are actually trained and certified if we offer this safe harbor to residents.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when we have a code enforcement case, we typically try to go after the responsible party. So if somebody were to hire a tree trimming company that was certified with the city, we would handle the enforcement usually directly with the tree trimming company. The only exception is when, let's say, they flee and we can't get a hold of them, then we might ultimately have to hold the property owner responsible, but that's extremely unlikely if they're using a company that's certified with the city because they want to remain certified in order to get more business.
So we essentially have a de facto safe harbor. Like if you're hiring someone good, then they're going to stick around and we can go after them. But if you're hiring somebody cheap, they might run and we're going to come after you. I'm curious. I would be interested in perhaps exploring whether it would make sense to move that from being de facto to being like explicit.
Yeah, and there's other cities and counties that do it nearby. So as part of the ordinance building process, that's something that we're definitely going to look into and create the framework for. And so we'll have a better idea when we bring back the draft ordinance, exactly what that's going to look like.
I have a couple of questions. Sometimes people just have their gardener trim the trees, or some homeowners who like DIY do it themselves. So how do you reach those people?
Yeah, so that would still be fine. They would still be required to get a permit. You know, sometimes it's hard for us to get every single person to comply with every single regulation. So it's kind of impossible for us to say that we're going to have 100% compliance. But the idea is to promote as much compliance as possible. So, and we'll touch on it a little bit more actually in the next planning principle, which is to reduce costs on individual homeowners so that they don't have to feel like they're evading our oak tree regulations.
Okay. So to be certified by the city, do you have to pay anything? Or do you just come and get a printout with information? I mean, what is the process?
We still have to sort out those details, but there would likely be a cost. But if we there is a possibility that we would want to incentivize it. I think we got an estimate from our arborist on how much the actual trainings would cost. So it wouldn't be that expensive for the city to actually do those trainings just within the existing oak tree consultant budget. I think we got like $800 a year estimate. So it's because we would do everybody at the same time once a year.
Okay, so that's going to be difficult for the individual homeowner who wants to suddenly trim something that they hadn't thought about at the beginning of the year and they want to use their gardener.
Right, but again, it's not a required program.
Right.
So if they wanted to use their gardener, that would be totally fine, and we would accept it. And actually, we're planning on having more lax requirements for pruning specifically, which would help the local gardeners to be able to apply for permits without needing a certified arborist to,
Okay, that
have
would,
to apply.
and if we can, now that we have our lovely new website, if we can plan ahead too and put all that pruning information up for our homeowners, so before they do their own project, they can just go online and see what the requirements are, that would be really good.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
definitely plan on doing that.
Do you mind? I don't know if this is the right section in enforcement, but are there any like blackout periods in bird nesting season, like February through August, that we're looking at, or is it this year round? Like it's the same thing? And if
Yeah, just generally, federally, you are required to do bird nesting surveys if you're trimming trees within that bird nesting season, which is the February to September. So we would abide by federal law for that. Yeah. And they would still be required to get a permit, which is how we would know.
Okay, thank you. So it won't change. Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll move on to number 4. So there have been many instances where a property owner needs to remove an oak tree for legitimate reasons, but has nowhere to plant the required mitigation trees on the property. Those owners have historically been required to contract with the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, or MRCA, to plant off-site mitigation trees. This is an expensive option and sometimes not feasible for single-family homeowners. Additionally, staff has been informed that MRCA may no longer be accepting mitigation trees in the first place. To address this problem, staff would like to pursue the creation of a mitigation bank on city-owned property. This would involve the evaluation of properties owned by the city, including city parks and other property, to establish a rough estimate of the capacity for oak tree plantings on city property. Then city would look to establish planting partnerships with local nonprofits or nurseries to establish and lock in the cost of procuring and planting different sizes of oak trees for a certain number of years, which would help us to establish a mitigation fee. As there is likely a very limited amount of space on city-owned property for oak trees, staff would also like to establish a reimbursement program where we would use mitigation funds to provide free oak saplings or box trees to local homeowners or businesses that express interest. As a last option, we could also partner with a local nonprofit that is able to take mitigation funds to plant trees outside of the city limits where there is more space for oak trees, as we would ideally want to retain as much oak tree canopy as possible within the city limits. So for proposed planning principle number 4, we would like to explore alternative mitigation strategies for instances where on-site replacements are not feasible. Examples may include the creation of a mitigation bank on city-owned property, establishing local planting partnerships with nonprofits or local nurseries, or creating an oak tree reimbursement program. And I'll pass it off again.
Thank you. Any questions?
So I think this is great. I confess to just being a little confused about how it works. So currently, they can pay an in lieu fee, right? And what I'm seeing is that the idea that the substitute is that it feels like there's still a fee.
That's correct. So right now, technically speaking, there isn't a fee. It is an option to provide for mitigation through enforcement, where if they've removed a tree and they don't have space on their property to plant new ones, we might accept a certain amount of value for the tree based on what was removed. And that's where we get into that sticky situation where our arborists are debating what the value of the tree was. So what we really want to do with this is work with local nurseries to establish the actual cost of different types of oak trees. So oak tree saplings, 24-inch box, 34 and 36-inch box, so that we can have flexible replacement options based on what type of oak tree has been removed or needs to be removed. Let's just say an oak tree is encroaching into somebody's property or somebody's home, and they need to remove it, otherwise their foundation will have damage. Once we establish that fee, it's going to be a lot cheaper, because when you have to plant oak trees on MRCA property, they actually have to lug water and bring trucks and water them up in the mountains, which is fairly expensive. So when you have a local nursery just having that fee to actually provide you with the box tree, and then having a local nonprofit go out and plant them on particularly a single family homeowner's property where you don't even have to spend city dollars watering it and maintaining it, that would be the most cost-efficient option. So it would definitely bring down that cost.
So in the old world, or the world as it exists today, I cut down an oak tree that I wasn't supposed to cut down. The city comes out and enforces it, and we get in a fight about how much. In the world that you're proposing, I've cut down an oak tree that I wasn't supposed to cut down, but we don't get in a fight about how much that oak tree was worth, and instead we just have a set, this is how much it costs.
Correct. And then we get faster replacement of habitat, and we already have planned places on where to put the oak trees. So we don't have to go out, procure a separate contract with MRCA, which they aren't doing anymore. And so it just, it creates certainty for being able to create offsite habitat and offsite oak tree plantings. Because right now, if MRCA stops, then we have nowhere to actually plant our oak trees.
I have a question. It's an idea, maybe a silly one that just occurred to me. If we have, trees removed and they're not going on the homeowner's property, could we have like a bank where other homeowners who want a tree could come to the city and say, I will let you put it into my backyard?
Yes. So that's the idea. So we would take in the mitigation funds, and we would essentially have a bank of oak tree mitigation funds, and as soon as we have enough money, we could advertise to everybody in the city, hey, we have oak tree mitigation funds available. If you want to plant oak trees on your property, please submit a request or an application, and we would provide those oak tree plantings for free.
Good, thank you.
All right, moving on. The oak tree ordinance has some unclear compliance thresholds. For example, the current regulations limit oak tree impacts by requiring property owners or applicants to assess the estimated tree canopy or root structure removal for overall sites, as well as individual trees. The general limit is 10% canopy or root structure removal for the overall site, and 20% crown or root structure removal for individual trees. However, it is unclear if the limits apply to canopy and root structure, or canopy or root structure, which would result in two different numbers depending on how we interpret the code. Another example is that to assess root structure removal, the city requires arborists to include % tree protection zone encroachment for individual trees and overall sites in their oak tree reports. However, TPZ encroachment and root structure removal aren't necessarily the same thing. These requirements that are unclear at times leave staff in a position where we have to interpret the intent of the oak tree regulations on a case-by-case basis. The ordinance also contains some impractical requirements, particularly regarding general pruning. Technically speaking, our ordinance requires all oak tree permit applications, including general pruning permits, to be submitted with an oak tree report prepared by a certified arborist. This is cost prohibitive, especially for single-family homeowners that need to periodically prune their trees. Under the strict interpretation of the ordinance, a single-family homeowner that just wants to prune a 2-inch branch would have to submit an oak tree report documenting and evaluating all oak trees on the property and all oak trees within 250 feet of the property. In cases of general pruning, these types of strict requirements result in property owners avoiding permits altogether and trimming or removing trees illegally. In cases of general pruning, a simple site visit by the city's oak tree consultant with photographs documenting the proposed cuts of only the affected trees should suffice. So for proposed planning principle number 5, We would like to create clear and objective application requirements and compliance thresholds for all types of oak tree permit applications and streamline the application process for general pruning permits. I'll toss it back.
Any questions? No? You can move on.
Last one. While it is not technically an issue with the current ordinance, staff has received numerous inquiries from the public about why we only protect oak trees and if we have considered protecting other types of trees that are native to the city. Our consultant, Dudek, researched tree species native to Agoura Hills and provided city staff with recommendations for other tree species to consider protecting. Those tree species are the madrone, Southern California black walnut, California sycamore, the Fremont cottonwood, red willow, Pacific willow, and the California bay laurel. Dudek used several factors shown on the screen to evaluate the potential impact of protecting those additional species. Based on these factors, Dudek and staff would only recommend that the City Council consider 2 additional tree species for protection. The Southern California black walnut should be considered for addition because it commonly occurs in natural settings throughout the city and is likely to be impacted by development in those areas. It is not likely to have a significant impact to residential homeowners or commercial properties as it hasn't been used frequently in developed landscapes, but they are an important species for local wildlife and biodiversity similar to oak trees. The California sycamore commonly occurs in natural settings and is frequently used in residential and commercial landscapes. It is also frequently used as a street tree, and the California sycamore can be significant size at maturity, contributing to a high level of canopy cover and reduction of the urban heat island effect. There are some negative impacts to protecting these species. The first is that they require medium and high water use respectively, which means that they might not be as suitable to be replanted in the location that they are removed. So off-site mitigation requirements would be important if they are considered for inclusion. The second is that the addition of additional protected trees would increase staff time spent drafting the ordinance and on enforcement and permit processing. At the LUEDC meeting on June 10th, the subcommittee asked whether the black walnut and sycamore have similar properties to oaks in terms of fire protection, and staff can confirm that walnuts and sycamore have similar properties to oak trees that make them good trees for high fire areas. All the scientific literature reviews and the fire department endorse them as trees that are good for a fire-wise landscape. Both of the species are allowed in Los Angeles County Field Modification Zone B, which is the field modification zone that extends 30 to 100 feet from structures. For the species that staff is not recommending for consideration, the madrone and the California bay laurel are not commonly found in natural settings or in urban landscapes and are not likely to be significantly impacted by developers or private property owners, so their inclusion would likely not be worth the time and expense. The Fremont cottonwood, red willow, and Pacific willow are only found in riparian areas adjacent to streams and creeks throughout undisturbed areas. And naturally occurring waterways are protected by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And if a project wished to impact a naturally occurring waterway in Agoura Hills, they would be required to obtain permits through CDFW, including permits for tree removals and impacts. So for this reason, these species are not likely to be impacted by development and would likely not be worth the time and expense of including them in a local protected tree ordinance. So with that, proposed planning principle number 6 is to evaluate community interest in protecting other types of trees within the city, particularly the California sycamore and the Southern California black walnut. Include protections and or incentives for these species if public opinion is favorable. So with that, I'll pass it back.
Thank you so much. Any questions? No? I just want to follow up. You said that, so for these two, the Southern California black walnut and the California sycamore, they do require a lot more water than an oak tree.
They're in about the same category as an oak tree. But if you're talking about a California sycamore, they're used a lot more frequently in urban landscapes. So if somebody wants to remove some sycamores and we're talking about having the same number of replacement mitigation requirements, say 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, and we need to plant all those on the same property, it becomes fairly impossible to meet your water budget allocated by MWELO at the state level. So that's where it becomes important to have options for offsite replacement.
And have we had a particular issue with these two types of trees, that it would suddenly be necessary to protect them like we do with the oaks?
In my opinion, no. I think the purpose of this is just to evaluate whether or not we would want to. So if it is the council's direction, we don't even have to look at this. Another option would be to just provide incentives for planting them rather than protections for removing them. I think that's another option that we could consider.
Thank you. Yes, please.
And one more question on that. If we could certainly add a clause with a mitigation for these 2 additional trees, that if they were going to do a 3-to-1, maybe they could choose what kind of tree. Like maybe they do an oak or a sycamore if they're taking out a black walnut. Like it doesn't have to be exactly the same. That's another option. Just throwing it out there. Just a thought. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Before we move on to the public comment, does any council member have any further questions? Councilmember Wolf.
Yeah, I have an overall question, and I don't know if this is right for right now, but possibly for deliberation, but regarding the threshold of like size, of what's the threshold of an oak or a plant that meets all these planning principles, and if that's something that we want to include, or maybe I'm missing something, but is there like, a certain canopy size or a certain trunk, like once it reaches the 3-inch threshold, or are we using an existing threshold?
So right now the threshold is 2 inches. If you prune a branch that is more than 2 inches, you need a permit with the city. So what we would look at doing, 2 inches is not a lot. So what we would want to do is kind of look at maybe scaling that back to maybe 4, 5, or 6 inches, so that it would only be more substantial cuts that actually require a permit. But again, that's just something that we're considering. We haven't landed on anything yet.
And so that will be discussed in the Land Use and Economic Development Committee when this is brought back on what the threshold is landed on.
That's correct. And I'll get to the next steps after this, but we're planning on taking it back once we have a draft ordinance to the LUEDC, and then to the Planning Commission, and then back to the City Council.
Okay, thank you. Answers my question.
Thank you. Any further questions? I will now defer to the recording secretary.
Sorry. I have one more slide.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize.
All right, so next steps. Staff is to prepare the draft ordinance for Planning Commission review, as well as LUEDC review, and the estimated time frame is September, October. Then we want to research city-owned property to determine suitability and capacity for oak tree plantings that would happen roughly the same time as the ordinance. And then we would also reach out to local nonprofits and nurseries to establish a baseline cost for different mitigation plantings. And we would aim to bring forward any required contracts and a fee resolution shortly after the adoption of the ordinance. And now you can go.
Thank you so much. All right, any further questions from our council members? No. All right, I will defer to the recording secretary.
Thank you, Mayor Sylvester. No written comments have been received and no speaker cards have been submitted.
Thank you so much. So now we have the opportunity for the City Council to discuss the proposed planning principles and to provide staff with general direction regarding the goals and objectives of the Oak Tree Ordinance Amendment. I will start with Councilmember Klein-Lopez, since we were on the committee together.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have to start off the oak tree discussion with a little nod to our former mayor, Joan Iacovone, who you can't really talk about oak trees and the protection and the maintenance of them without thinking of her, because she is a force behind really protecting the oaks, but in a way that was not so burdensome on homeowners who care for them. So little nod to Joan, wherever you are. I'm sure she's watching from somewhere. But she was a big voice in, particularly in the pruning issue, because she was, it was a classic example of a homeowner, a senior living by herself and really feeling burdened by some of the requirements that were coming down, through our municipal code in trying to do the right thing. And so I do want to kind of give her that nod. But I think it's a great start. We had a pretty spirited discussion when it came to in the Land Use Economic Development Committee. Big fan of going towards incentives and not being so punitive, because I think, to your point, Mr. Nesevic, it just creates a sub-universe of people who don't want to even tell the city what they're doing, which of course is more harmful to the native plants that we're trying to the native oak trees that we're trying to protect. So, and the other important piece is that, why would you want to plant a new oak tree if you were then going to be saddled with all of this cost and expense and laws to maintain them? So I love the idea of moving towards a more incentive-based ordinance and not such a punitive one. I don't remember talking about this in the subcommittee, but maybe I missed it, but I love the idea of the plaque. I think there's a lot of pride in ownership of particularly our larger heritage oaks, and I think that would be an amazing way to really take that pride on a home-by-home basis. So I just want to say I love that idea. Also in favor of the certified tree trimmers. I think for also the minimal cost, I think it would be amazing if the city could cover the cost of that training. I would absolutely advocate for that. I appreciate the creative thoughts with the mitigation. I know that MRCA, they've got a lot to face with their lands, and particularly they lose so much due to fires, and so it is a huge project that they have. Their restoration goals are much bigger than this, and so I think it makes sense that we kind of have a separate plan, because they have other fish to fry, shall we say. And so I like the idea of to the extent we can do it, a city-owned mitigation property, but if not, I love the idea of this bank where we can deposit and withdraw from. So, and the part about the codes being inconsistent and conflicting, and us having it in one section of our municipal code is a no-brainer, and so I'm glad this gives us the opportunity to clean that up a little. So up until there, those are my comments. Regarding the other species, the reason why I brought it up in the subcommittee is because I think there are also species that are protected in the North Area Plan, just outside of our borders, and I think that is important to recognize other trees, particularly those that help our environment, that help our biodiversity and our habitat, and in particular are important for fire protection. I mean, as we go more towards zone 0 and getting, removing types of plants and trees from our properties, I think it's important to make sure that we are protecting the native species that are here for a reason. And so I would be in favor of protecting those 2 additional species, but I appreciate your point about the difficulty of just, swapping locations and water use and things like that. So perhaps we can think of some flexible ways flexible options, so that if you do have to take out a walnut tree or a sycamore, you're still incentivized to keep it, because I think that is what our goal is. But if you do have to remove it, perhaps we can think of some flexible ways to mitigate that. So those are my comments, but I'm interested to hear what my fellow council members have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Klein-Lopez. Councilmember Anderson.
Ditto. I mean, honestly, ditto. Like everything that you had to say, I completely agree with. We love our oak trees here in Agoura Hills. We love them even more now that we understand that they are, what is it that one of the firefighters, they're sentient, or no, sentinels. They're sentinels helping catch the embers. And I too support our exploration of incentivizing the protection of those two additional species for that reason, and also for just climate change reasons. Like Robbie, Mr. Nesevic, you said that they will also help increase the canopy cover. So I think we need to be doing all that we can be doing. And I just want to. I super love the incentives that we're doing as opposed to enforcements. That's the kind of community that we want to be, and it's going to get us our result even better. So I love that.
Councilmember Wolf.
Well said. Great presentation, really thorough, and I'm glad that we're doing this because it feels like we're kind of bringing this thing that has been kind of in the shadows sometimes, and people wanted to operate in the shadows on this out, and it's going to be beneficial for both residents, the environment, and the city. The code, from what I learned, it was really confusing, and I'm glad that it's being simplified and streamlined. I really love the idea of plaques throughout the city or markers of some kind. There's a real sense of pride and place. And I do like the idea of mitigation bank. I know we're possibly looking at the tree inventory study, so I don't know if those two would work together and how those would work together, because I do know that it's great to talk about planting oak trees throughout the city, but we've been talking about that for a long time, and our parks I don't know where there's room really, and so that's the one concern. I love the idea of a bank and finding, if there's open space that we're able to purchase in the future within the city boundaries to turn that into a bank. I'm thrilled with all this. I like the idea of including the two other species too, because while oaks do get all the attention and they are like the most high profile for the wildfire preparedness, the other species have evolved to survive, and it's important for biodiversity of plant species too. So I'm all for that, but I'll let that be, I guess, decided in the committee. I want to thank the committee for the work on this because this is complex and I think really thorough, and I'm thrilled about it. So thank you.
Well, I agree with everything that my fellow council members have said. I would just like to push for having a free certification process because we want people to do it. We don't want to discourage people because there's a cost. And also, if we can figure out a way to make that certification as flexible as possible, maybe having it as something that they can do online, because you're going to have a lot of tree trimmers, and their schedules are all different. So if we can figure out a way to be as flexible as possible with that certification, as well as not charging them for it, because we just want them to do it the right way, and we don't want to penalize anybody for that. And then the other thing I just want us to be aware of, I'd like the idea of protecting more trees, but we don't know yet what's coming down with the 0 to 5 zone, and maybe a little bit, I think they're talking about 10 feet from chimneys for certain trees. So homeowners may have costs to remove trees. So I don't want them to have additional costs if they have to remove a tree because the fire department says it has to go. I don't want them then to have a mitigation cost as well. So if we can figure out something there, to say if it's been required by the fire department, you don't have to then replace the tree somewhere else because they're already paying a lot of money to have that tree taken out. So that's just something I would like us to take into consideration. But otherwise, you've done an amazing job, so thank you to you and all your staff. All right. No formal action is required. Are there any further comments before we move on? No. Are there any comments from staff this evening? Seeing none, are there any comments from City Council? Councilmember Wolf.
Just, again, commend the city on is this a good time for putting on a great performance, and Amy, you and your team did a fantastic job. I've never seen so many people at a city event, and just great work. It brought people together, and you guys do a fantastic job, so thank you for all that.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
I'll just echo that. We had a blast, an absolute blast, and everybody around us did too. And the drone show was amazing.
The same. I just was going to say the same thing, that it was really a hit. I got nothing but fantastic comments. So, as you say, Amy, next year bigger and better, right? So, but no, fantastic comments. So, thank you for all the hard work.
Yeah, I agree with all my fellow council members. Now, from this last year to this year, we doubled. So, are we going to keep doing that? No, I'm only kidding. It was wonderful, and I too had nothing but positive comments. So thank you all so much. You did an amazing job. So the regular City Council meeting scheduled for 6 p.m. on Wednesday, July the 23rd, 2025, has been cancelled. The next regular meeting is scheduled for August the 13th, 2025. This meeting is now adjourned, but we are now going to go directly into the successor agency meeting. Welcome to the successor agency meeting. Please silence all cell phones and other electronic devices. If you wish to speak or submit a written comment, please complete a comment card for each item and submit to the agency secretary prior to the public comment portion of the item. I will now call this meeting to order, and I will defer to the agency secretary.
Good evening, Director Anderson,
Present.
Director Anstead, Director Klein-Lopez,
Here?
Vice Chair Tim Wolf,
Present.
Chair Sylvester.
Present.
Chair Sylvester, you have a quorum with Director Anstead absent.
Thank you. I'm now asking for approval of the agenda. Will the maker of the motion and the second to approve the agenda state your names?
Director Anderson moves to approve the agenda.
I'll second. Deborah Klein-Lopez.
I defer to the recording secretary for the roll call vote.
Director Anderson,
Here.
Director Klein-Lopez,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tim Wolf,
Aye.
Chair Sylvester.
Aye. And
Cho-
just, Councilmember Anderson, did you want to say aye?
Correct. Director Anderson meant to say aye.
I'm sorry, I missed you. Chair Sylvester, you have approval 4-0.
Thank you. This section is reserved for persons wishing to speak on items not listed on the agenda that are under the subject matter jurisdiction of the successor agency. I will now defer to the agency secretary.
No written public comments have been received and no speaker cards have been submitted.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the successor agency? Seeing none, I will now call for an motion and a second to adopt the consent calendar.
So moved. Deborah Klein-Lopez.
Second, Director Anderson.
I will now defer to the agency secretary for the roll call vote.
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Klein-Lopez,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tim Wolf,
Aye.
Chair Sylvester.
Aye.
Chair Sylvester, you have approval 4-0.
Thank you. Are there any comments from staff? Seeing none, are there any comments from the board of directors? Seeing none, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you and good night.